Welcome to the Land&Legacy podcast. This is your host, Adam Keith.
And Matt Dye.
And Zach Shermer.
Right here for another habitat-focused podcast on the Sportsman's Nation Podcast Network. This week's podcast brought to you by Deer Lab. It's a busy time of the year. We're all getting trail cam pictures, so check out deerlab.com to organize and understand your trail cam images. You guys ready for another podcast?
Always.
Yes, sir.
It's always like when we start, you guys get the phones out and you're like, oh, we got to do an
social media.
An Insta story. And so I'm like, I'm doing the introduction and I don't know what else to say. So you guys get off the phones and come talk to me.
Mine's sitting right here.
There
I
you
haven't
go.
touched it yet.
You were just sitting back there trying to get the sweat out of the palms of your
getting
hands.
nervous. I'm on the Land Legacy podcast again.
Hey, Mom! Hey!
Yeah. All right.
Download twice.
So we are, and not from the same device. It doesn't count. So we're right here doing another rundown of Session 4 of the QDMA Deer Module.
Woo! Yeah. Oh, hey, and real quick before we jump to that, this week is QDMA National Convention. So this is going to drop Tuesday, and Ab and I are leaving Thursday morning to go down to the convention. It's going to be an awesome event. I know they're going to blow it up on social media. So be following along on their page as well as ours. I know we'll be sharing some stuff. But Saturday morning, they told us that they are going to be recording our presentation live. So that's Saturday morning at 11 o'clock. They will be recording live on their Facebook page our presentation. So haven't shared what we're talking about in detail too much, but it's going to be a great presentation, and we're looking forward to doing it and sharing some good information. So if you're interested in it, be sure to watch on Facebook Live.
There you have it. Zach, you going to be watching?
Oh, I'll be watching.
There's nothing else he'd
Liar.
rather be doing.
I'll be there.
Liar. So week 4, we've before we get into this, another reminder, go to QDMA.com/land&legacy for the 20% discount to go through the modules of
With us.
deer. What do they call this? Deer stewardship or deer? That's their
Online
other
deer
course.
module.
Online deer module sessions.
That's it.
We've got 8 sessions for you. We are hitting the halfway mark when we finish this one up. This week's module is focused on fawns.
All about fawns. And I think every module we've talked about the myths and stuff that just kind of revolve around deer, and fawns is absolutely no different. How many different, I don't know, phrases and junk do you hear about fawns, this and that? But again, in this module, they have science to back things up and just debunk these myths. So it's, as always, super educational. But a couple of things that really stuck out in this module, and I think it's one that kind of brings a lot of topics that we've talked about. It brings it together, and we're going a little bit different. You might not think of too much of fawns on this, but it's more of a kind of an encompassing understanding a concept, I guess. So I'm going to read a little something, and then we're going to talk about it. But it's important to note that fawns have relatively short time period of peak vulnerability. This is after they're born, and it highlights the importance of a short, intense rut that corresponds to a short fawning period from an anti-predation standpoint. The more fawns that hit the ground at the same time allows for less drawn-out time frame when predators can cause the most damage to fawn populations. So we've talked before with Kip Adams about managing antlerless deer numbers and the importance of that. And I think we may have just kind of briefly talked about this. And then we've also, of course, talked about predators and their role in the environment. And then, of course, talked about fawn habitat. But this just really brings it all together. And if we have a healthy adult deer population of buck to doe ratio, and which would equate to a short intense rut, which is the best to hunt, then we're going to have, as a direct correlation to that, a short time period where all the fawns are going to drop. And if you have that many fawns in the ground and only X amount of predators, they can't do as much damage to the fawns in comparison if it was a long strung out period, because they're only vulnerable, but they're most vulnerable for a small time frame when they get their legs and wits about them, can travel with mom and increase the speed in which they can travel. So if we have a short, intense rut, we have a short, intense fawning season, and then we don't have as much predation. And
the hunting's much better.
Yeah, and we kind of talked about it before the podcast got going. It was like, if you're out there and you have a long drawn-out rut, you're not managing your antlerless deer in correlation to the number of bucks you've got, and your habitat is crappy, then why are you complaining about predators?
No, because that's the easy one to blame it on.
It's easy to blame, but the worst to control out of all of that. The toughest.
The toughest.
Right?
The one that costs the most money, if you're even able to control it.
I mean, you can control the habitat unless you're on a lease or something like that has restrictions. But if you own your own property, you can do the work or pay someone or pay a consultant to come out and tell you what to do. But you can make a difference.
You can make a difference improving the habitat. You can make a difference by improving the herd health, by managing the buck-to-doe ratio. If you have too many does, which is oftentimes the problem we find in a lot of the farms we visit, and that kind of, there's a lot of things that come to blame, but it basically comes down to one of the most common is just not enough people shooting does. That's the easiest one, but
so easy.
Not enough people hunting the farms to shoot those does. Or sometimes regulations don't allow for enough tags to harvest does. There's ways around that as far as legal ways around that, but certainly harvesting more does. And that may be a lot of times, I think of one of our good friends. He has so many does on his farm to where he's seen a decrease in some of his mature deer. His number one hit listers over time have gotten a little bit smaller and a little bit smaller.
Right.
The quality has gone down. And there's a lot of things responsible for that, but one of the biggest is the fact that there's too many deer, so the habitat isn't premier now. There's not as much native vegetation. The food plots are suffering. And so, therefore, the deer are suffering because there isn't as much food available.
Yeah, there's a direct result in the lack of high-quality or excess high-quality vegetation. So you're going to see a correlation to antler size. And this is, again, over time. But when we talk about just getting fawns to that stage in which they can be more self-sustainable, a short, intense rut is going to do it.
What was the farm you were talking about before the podcast? You guys were at in Iowa. You were kind of talking about how your habitat will kind of represent the fawns that are laid by your does.
That's one of our clients' properties in southern Iowa, and it's just that's one that's been a transformation of kind of poor
Old
habitat
pasture.
to overgrown pasture. As Matt said, it's smooth brome and fescue and orchard grass and all these non-native perennial cool season grasses that basically choke out the native vegetation. And since that property was not cultivated in a lot of these areas, there's a great seed bank of natives, and a lot of times you have to buy, plant, and do that. But we got lucky on this one, and it was already there, and so we sprayed out a lot of that cool season non-native, and boom, we had this huge explosion over the last 2 years of native forage, as far as forbs, and then a lot of native grasses. So it went from knee-high turf grass, a smooth brome and fescue, to chest-high ragweed and cool and warm
grass,
season grasses, and
blue,
even
big
native
blue.
cool season grasses as your Canada wild rye, Virginia wild rye. There's all kinds of, there's tons of milkweed. Tons of monarchs flying around last time we were up there.
Quail whistling.
And a pheasant. And now you see this to where the food plots look probably better than we've seen them. The crops look better than we've seen them because it's not as much stress on the food source that they're planting the crops because there's enough food available throughout the property. So we went from having, let's say, 200 acres of crops and food plots, and that being the only real food source, to 800 plus of high quality forage throughout the property.
And the does will lay more fawns because there's more habitat.
When you
for them
start
to
seeing
survive.
an improvement in habitat, Matt,
There's just more
something.
cover and forage for them. Yeah. Yeah,
I
totally.
think there's something you read to us during that discussion.
That's, I guess, regarding the doe fawns and them being able to get to a breeding level within their first year. But to answer that, yeah, absolutely. If there's more quality habitat, then a doe will respond and can respond with having healthier deer population and give birth to more fawns.
Instead of singles, it's twins
Or triplets.
or triplets.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. It's that restoration isn't done. Like we're still helping work through that. So who knows what the next years are going to provide? But and again, this is a kind of we're in the second year of doing this, and it's incredible to see the difference and the response from not only the vegetation standpoint, but from the wildlife as well. Not just deer, but it's awesome.
I think of it like this: we all want to see instant gratification as society. And as deer hunters, we want to do something. We want to, in a month, turn around and see our results and say, yay, we did something really good there. Let's look at the time frame. And that's why we preach so much about the native vegetation, native habitat, is because you could go out and plant 5 acres on your 200-acre farm and think, okay, I've got 5 acres of food plots. I'm going to grow some big bucks. It's going to take a long time, if it ever even happens, to see a change in the quality of bucks on your property.
Just based on that fact. Correct.
But if you go out and let's say you're one of the fortunate people in the world and you're in prairie country or grasslands somewhere and you can go out and change, just like the property we're talking about, change a larger area, or sometimes not even a larger area, but you can change your acres from very low quality to extremely beneficial. You're going to see that change happen a lot quicker than just planting some food plots.
Exactly. We basically started from zero at that point, or that level of benefit. It was pretty much a zero for that smooth brome, and now we went from a 0 to 80 on a scale from 0 to 100, 80 plus. Honestly, it's incredible. And that short of a time frame. So of course we're going to see a drastic response from the wildlife, but over time, yeah, we got to make these changes and progress to improved habitat.
And for our guys in timber country, just like you are, Zach, and we are as well, and that's what part of the podcast will be about later as we progress out of this QDMA module is. You're looking at how can I make a lasting improvement to where I really turn this ship around to where my deer and wildlife are improving, to where I'll be able to see it in a quicker time frame, is managing timber rather than just planting those food plots. And so you're adding those acres and acres and acres of not only high quality forage but cover, and not just forage during the summer but throughout the winter and fall. And to where you have deer that are much healthier because they have more readily available forage and cover and security and all things to make deer healthy.
Yeah, and this might be a generalization, but it's always like whenever someone's looking at a property, they're probably thinking the first things, where can I get a dozer and create a food plot?
Oh, yeah.
That's like the first thing on their mind. How can I get beans in here? How can I get food
Where's
plot in here?
Where's the flat ridges?
Right.
Yeah.
Instead of looking at the timber and where the deer are moving and how you can make it better,
And it's enjoyable to hunt over food plots. It's so, you can't ever, no matter what science comes out, you can't take that away. And it has benefits for sure, but if we want to make a lasting change and a lasting benefit and visually see changes in the wildlife, we've got to address all the points, A through Z, not just A.
Yeah, it's a long-term benefit, like you said.
Yeah, totally.
So what else about the fawns?
So another big point, everyone's wondering or debating, honestly, how many fawns is average for each doe, right? What's the average fawn per doe? Well, in 2015, the national average was 0.58. So it took 4 does to recruit 2 fawns into basically the hunting season. 0.58. So that's just kind of a food for thought thing. Which means it's going to be much less in some areas. and more in others. Midwest, I think, was averaging 0.8, where Southeast and Northeast was more on 0.3. But the average is 0.58 throughout the entire nation.
Do you think those numbers are low due to predation or poor habitat?
I don't think.
What's the main key?
I don't think there is a main key. I think it's a culmination, just like everything else in biology or science or whatever we talk about on the podcast. It's a combination, a equation that basically that's your end result is 0.58. It takes a bunch of different factors, but there has been an increase, and of course we read that in the module, an increase in predators, but then again a decrease in habitat. We're losing quality habitat at the, I don't know about the same rate, but at the same time, those two things are occurring.
Yeah, and sometimes those predator numbers aren't. I think of like everybody talks about South Carolina and Georgia and the coyote population exploding, but I don't. In my entire life at the family farm, I haven't seen. It's not like we go out and see coyotes all the time. We just don't see them that much. You hear them a little more, but when it comes to the habitat, it's like brother and I had the discussion today. When we were kids, our timber and a lot of the areas around was all burned. People were burning like crazy. There was fields that weren't getting cut for hay. They were just grown up, and they would get burned over. And so there was a lot more of what they call wild grass, which was just native pastures and native grass thickets. And then the woodlots, so we're getting burned, and people were logging a lot more. And then there was the 80s, late 80s, 90s, 2000s where people weren't burning anymore. Smokey the Campaign came along, I guess, way before then, but people started getting more moving into the country, so there weren't as many fires. Habitat started decreasing, and we're looking around now, and we're actually really stepping up the TSI game, and we have all kinds of vegetation growing in our woods, but you look across the fence, and it's just
biological
you can see
desert
forever, and there's just nothing growing.
Which I guess that would make it easier for predation on fawns.
Yeah, I mean,
if
they're going to be here,
right?
That's where they go.
If they chose to be there, that's an easy game.
Right.
Absolutely. That's like going to oh crap, what's that? I'm drawing a blank on that game. Scratch that. Never mind.
Yeah, cool story, bro.
Yeah, right.
Well, anyways, about the habitat, you guys have said this before, and it's really interesting. I've never really thought about it this way. If you increase your habitat, it's not just going to increase, the fawn protection for those fawns or turkey poults, but you're going to increase the numbers for rabbits, mice,
exactly,
and that's what a coyote is actually probably going to eat on. That's an easy meal.
He's going to find that a lot easier.
You increase the habitat,
hopefully.
The coyotes are going to go more towards the rabbits, an easier meal. So I've heard you guys say that before. That's just a great way to think about it, really.
Yeah.
We've heard the term. It's a buffer prey. The rabbits, the quail, to game species like turkey and fawns and this and that. Like they're in place. They're a buffer. The moles.
I'm trying to think.
Mice.
That was that Texas Rolling Plains Research Center or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's what it was.
They showed a direct correlation in the success of of quail populations increasing went hand in hand with one of the rats that they commonly have down there. So if the rat population was increasing, the bobwhite quail population was increasing. And
Whack-a-mole.
And
that's the name of that game. I was thinking it pops up and it's like, here I am, and the others are in the cover. Whack-a-mole.
We already forgot how that relates, so we're going.
I was thinking, I was like, what is the name of that game?
Cool story.
Whack-a-mole. Okay, got it.
So buffer prey, and so that's habitat. You can never go wrong with improving habitat, and I don't know, Matt, before I'm going to go on a long little rant here to go into the second part of our podcast.
So if you need a pee break, go ahead.
Yeah. Is there anything else in the fawn modules that you want to talk about?
There's one more, and this is the big portion of dealing with fawns and that second rut that a lot of people talk about that may occur in December in your area, and what influences that. How do we get more fawns, female fawns, to be sexually viable during the first year of birth? Like, they can do it, and it happens quite a bit, and there's some numbers here associated with that. But what they have found in various states like South Dakota, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Alabama, New Hampshire, that is a wide range of fawns, percent of fawns throughout each state that become sexually viable. And they have to reach about 70 pounds for them to become sexually viable. And hopefully that's around mid-December, and you can kind of get that increase in that second rut. This is in part due to that. So what they found is that the habitat is incredibly indicative of the amount of fawns that do become sexually viable. So here we go. Pennsylvania, the average fawn, Pennsylvania, 25% of them bred in 2008. However, that range in which the fawns, the percentage basically fell within 0 to 48%. So 0% in some areas of Pennsylvania, while 48% of the fawns in other portions of the state were bred. But the average was 25. And let's see, Alabama, the range was 0 to 33%. New Hampshire, 0 to 25. South Dakota, 0 to 58. Virginia, 3% to 49%. That's the range that were sexually viable. Again, the average fell in the middle, but they were able to tell the habitat was the predictor in if your fawns became sexually viable.
So that's just for the fawns?
That's
reaching
just for the
70
fawns,
pounds?
70 pounds, okay. Year one. And again, this is just further evidence of the importance of that quality forage and cover for them to reach this, for them to be able to not be stressed, for them to have that cover, that security, for them to go out and forage enough and have that available to basically breed. And if they're breeding at that age, you have more fawns the next year. If you have a whole age class or a portion of an age class that isn't breeding, you're not going to get nearly as many fawns, right? So if your habitat is better, the next year your fawns, you'll have more fawns on the ground that drop. So which are going to be more the next year and then the next year. Just it's a building block.
In the step in those blocks is if you're seeing fawns, if you're seeing twins, triplets, you're seeing deer numbers increase, you're seeing that second rut, that December time frame or whenever it is, you're seeing more chasing from those fawns reaching where they reach the size basically to where they become sexually mature, and so they're carrying a fawn that next year. Then that step, if you've taken that step, you've improved the habitat to where you've seen those increase. That's where I think a lot of times we then forget to continuing managing that
follow-up. Exactly.
It's the same thing as timber harvest that we talk about. There's a lot of times we're really good at step 1 and maybe step 2, but step 3 might be the most important to continue that into the future as healthy populations or healthy land management. So if you are seeing that increase of deer numbers, it's also important not to sit back and enjoy it so long to where now you have the problem of, okay, I've got too many deer.
Again, I guess some people have probably asked, how do you guys come up with topics? Well, there is always something to talk about, just like that. You can't sit back on your heel and say, oh, I'm good, I got so many deer, look at all this. You better start managing that herd if you do see it growing. Or if you're already at that standpoint, you're like, I've got so many deer on this place, manage the herd. It is a job. You have to think of it just like managing the habitat. It's super important. You've got to manage that herd to see healthy populations, sustainable populations, that short, intense rut that everyone's looking for. It's fun to hunt.
Yeah, absolutely. Very fun to hunt.
That's it on those fawns.
Okay, so
I don't know what next week. Oh, actually, next week we're talking QDMA. So we're not going to have a module next week, but we're going to be at the convention interviewing some folks. So that'll be a cool one to talk about.
Remember, that's www.qdma.com/land&legacy to follow along on the modules to learn more about all things whitetail deer. So, we're going into the summer, hot dog days of summer as they call it.
It's been rough.
And we have heard so much. I mean, it seems like there's a drought across a lot of the country. A little more severe in certain places, but here at home we definitely are reaching a dry spell. And it kind of brings up we're going into this podcast going, okay, what are we talking about? But we haven't given you guys a follow-up on a lot of the stuff we started out talking about and we have going on now. And so we definitely want to cover those things, those conversations we have as we go to the farm and the things we notice. And so this is summer food plot updates and timber harvesting updates. And so we're going to be talking about all the different things that we've noticed. As you followed along, we started the timber harvest last summer on the Prairie Hollow property. Now we've harvested and have had about 150 acres, give or take, that have been logged. The logger stepped away from the property for a short period to go to, I say short period, I guess it's been several months now.
Yeah, it's a long period.
It's been a little bit longer than we would hope, but that's the way it goes sometimes. And so we have about 150 acres that have been harvested and pretty aggressive. Now, we talk about Web Soil Survey. These areas register as woodland and glade. And so our goal is to return it to glade and woodland, so more open than it once was. And so we cut out a lot of, these have been used and abused acres of land. And so there's a lot of hickories, a lot of black oaks that have been kind of fighting some disease. And so we had the ability to really open it up. And a lot of times we say timber harvest ugly. That's just what's going to happen. Matt and I have watched it unfold this spring.
I can't help but smile, honestly.
When you think about what was there before the logging truck rolled in and what is there now, it's just going, holy cow, how come more people aren't doing this?
The deer, honestly, that show up, when we looked at trail camera, tell me if I'm lying, they are smiling on trail camera.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, that one little 7-point just couldn't help but sit right in front of the camera.
He's just cheesing, man.
Yeah.
They're looking good. They're doing well. And the habitat, I mean, it is night and day. And when we talk about the timber quality that was there before, there wasn't much quality. It was just timber was there. It was like having, I won't say weeds in your food plots because we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but how a lot of times people get just so annoyed at how devastating some weeds or whatever can be in plots. But it had that appearance of just zero quality, no benefit, except the straggling acorns that some trees would produce. But now it's changed. It has completely changed. And the understory, I guess say, there is understory. There wasn't anything before.
Yeah,
besides leaves and twigs.
Forget what podcast number when we talked about the amount of food produced per acre of forage.
And a young forest is 1,000 pounds per acre.
And a young forest with
prescribed
fire was 1,500 pounds. And so there's a lot more food in a soybean field, range from like 4,000 to 6,000.
Yeah,
somewhere in there. And closed canopy forest was 100 or 200 pounds?
50 to 100 pounds per acre of digestible forage.
Yeah. Wow. Shermer didn't apparently listen to that
didn't
podcast.
listen to that one.
Missed on that.
And so, yeah, a huge difference between 50 to 100 pounds of forage to 1,000 to 1,500 pounds.
And that's the thing. In that equation, that young forest is also providing cover. Like, we cannot forget about that aspect too. You're going, if you're closed canopy, you're going from very little forage and very little cover to managing a young forest, which what we have kind of coming back now is so much food and so much cover.
And not just the benefit to wildlife, but beneficial as water retention. A lot of runoff happens with closed canopy forest, but when you have that early successional grasses and forbs growing, as well as trees, you take in a lot more water into your soil profile rather than it just running off into the creek and into the Gulf.
So many more roots on the top layer because of these new annuals that are coming back and perennials. So
it's very beneficial all through from the soil all the way to the animals. The trees are much healthier. And so to me, it's hard not to get excited about the massive change, and not just the change as far as we made some money, but the habitat was improved. But then you look at the difference between the natives that are growing there versus some of the stuff we could try to plant. in our food plots that are struggling in the drought. And then you look at the ragweed and the giant ragweed, the common ragweed, and all the other things that are growing in this timber harvest. They're still just as green and tall, and deer are hammering them. And you can't help but look at it and say, oh, we did good right there.
Oh, I mean, it is seriously night and day. And if you are a person who is scared of timber harvest, just encourage you to, maybe there's some public around that's occurred recently or taken place.
Find a local forester.
Find someone to walk you through these areas. If you haven't experienced them, you need to. You need to do yourself that service. And what we talk about on the podcast, you need to get that visual, that in-person feel of the amount of cover, forage, and security. And especially if there's a good deer population, take notice of what they're eating and the amount of forage there. It'll blow your mind. It'll change your mind in the process of that.
I was in that category. I had to see it to believe it. And I know I kind of talked about that the first podcast we were on, but going around and shooting properties with you guys and like going out and scouting some public land that had been managed, it just looks a lot different than what our farm had looked. And I had stepped on your guys' place. Was it once before? Was it only once, or did we do some turkey hunts before it had gotten logged?
Oh, we did
turkey
some
hunts.
turkey hunts.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
So I had been on it a few times, and it was all just a
Crap.
Yeah,
You
thick
didn't wanna say it.
timber,
I can
Ozark
see it.
Hills, like
Yeah.
a lot of farms you see. And we just did a shootout there not too long ago, and it's completely different. I mean,
Yeah.
some of the stuff
There's
we walk through, it's like you can hardly walk through. There's so much growth under there.
There's
it's pretty
things
cool.
growing that you would think, where did this come from?
Right.
Who planted this? And it's just laying there and a lot of times you'll see like a little clump of grass that's like maybe as big as your hand, and you think, I wonder what kind of grass that is. It's barely growing under this closed canopy forest. And then we cut out the trees, and it's now this big clump of big blue stem. And you're like, that turned into that? How does that happen?
It's kind of like that person in high school that you're like, oh, he's a dweeb. Then you come back like 4 years later, you're like, holy crap, are you that same guy? Holy crap. You've been hitting the gym, bro.
Our farm is obviously not on quite the scale that you guys went on with the 150 acres. It's just the small, probably around 10 to 15 acres we worked on this winter. But I was there a couple weekends ago, and it's just those areas that we had worked on, going through just one season of the growing season, it's completely different. A cedar thicket that had never seen any growth in its life, just only cedars, nothing underneath it. We cut all the cedars down about 2 acres. Now there's grasses everywhere. I walked through it, and a deer was bedding around the edge of it. I mean, it's just a cool thing to see that. And that was the plan too. You know, we planned to cut that, to turn that into a bedding area. And it's just nice to see that a deer was actually bedding right where we had planned.
And that's how quick though that some turnaround can be.
Right.
You cut that this winter.
A few months, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's
Well, think of the sticker 8 hunt. We cut that out in February, and I killed that buck in it in October.
In it, the middle of it.
Yeah, and grazing on browsing on the. We got too many cows and deer in our. It's grazing and browsing and
Munching.
Anyway, eating. They're just eating it.
Hammering.
Sherman, I don't know if I've told you this, but when you think about land management and what we do, and there's really no awards. There's no Academy Award. There's no Oscar.
Accolades.
There's no way to like signify that you've done job well done, and so you look for, okay, what awards are there to win in this, and the best award we get, which I think is much better than some plastic or metal thing that you're going to stick on the shelf, is you do the work to say, I'm turning this back into a bedding area. Or for me, one of the things that happened just recently was I'm cutting this out and making it more of a woodland setting for the woodland species that come through here. The summer tanager is a bird that you see passing through. I returned to that area, and there's a summer tanager. You get the award by seeing Mother Nature or nature just go, yep, this is what I was looking for.
Yeah.
And so you made that a bedding area in your mind, and then you saw a deer bedding in it, and that's just like, you can't.
It worked.
There's nothing better than that.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. And we had another cedar thicket we had cut down Oh, it was another 2-acre one right off an area we call the fourth field. It's kind of in a bottom. And my dad had done some work on the edges with the dozer too. And we've got a nice, I know you guys are doing the edge speak too, but we created a nice edge on there. There's some grasses in there that are waist high. There's ragweed all over that field right now, and all the ragweeds just nipped off at the top, and it's just really cool. We ended up burning all those cedars down, and now we just have a huge 2.5 acre, probably 60 to 70% open canopy area that has never seen the sunlight before. So the fire was a little hot, so it might take a couple seasons for that grass and stuff to grow back in, but as soon as it's ready, it's going to be
you guys have cool have you ever put your farm on web soil survey to see what it registers as?
We did it in that Mississippi shoot, remember?
Okay, that's right.
And it was
woodland, wasn't it?
It was. I think it's
woodland, which is what, 50% canopy?
No, it's a little bit more. You're
60?
looking at probably 60 to 70% canopy, and then open.
Yeah, that was most of our farm.
Okay.
There was a few. I think there might have been, what is one of them, Savannah Glade or something?
Glade.
Savannah,
there was a glade on your place.
There was
one
over
in
glade.
that southwest corner.
Yeah, that
where all the cedars are.
Yeah, that was another. Oh yeah, we took your advice and was that a little hot? Sorry,
that was a little hot. You're getting real excited
here.
that mic.
The glade.
We talked to the MDC rep for our area, and we got approved for 18 acres of TSI, including glade restoration. So part of those 18 acres are in the middle of those TSI projects. There's cedar thickets that's going to be cut, and then around's going to be TSI'd.
Perfect.
So we got approved for 18 acres of that and a 4-acre permanent forest opening. Isn't that what it's called?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Where you just make a field.
You make a food. Make a food plot. Yeah. That sounds like you guys are well on your way. Yeah.
A lot of work ahead of us, though.
A lot of work. It is. Yeah.
But
I would
you're
rather
rewarded with what you've already seen.
Here it is for you, Zach. We're not even there yet, but would you rather do a lot of work or spend a lot of money?
A lot of work.
Exactly.
And get paid for it.
That's it. Yeah.
Or would you rather sit there and not do anything and just keep hunting it the way you have?
Well, yeah, you're right, because we've had some down. I mean, last year was a good year, but it was kind of going down, and something needed to be done. And I don't know if we knew exactly what it needed to be. So that's why it's been really beneficial spending the time and understanding what it is that we need to be doing.
Right.
Timber management.
Right.
That's what you guys, when you look at a
That's
farm
the bread
that's
and butter.
mostly timber, that's the biggest improvement I can make. If you're looking at a prairie and going, okay, how can I improve this? Well, most likely try to restore the prairie. Spray out the smooth brome or whatever other invasives are there and make it as beneficial and as profitable as possible as far as the prairie. So when I going back to that timber harvest, is you think about all the species that are now growing, Matt and Zach. You just look at, we were all three there not too long ago, and what you don't have to go very far to see what it was, closed canopy forest. You see the occasional black-eyed Susan, you see the occasional rattlesnake master, but they're all just doing okay. And then when you step over where it's been logged and it's just so thick of green carpet of black-eyed Susans and all kinds of daisies and coreopsis and, you guys saw yellow honeysuckle, I think is what it was, one of our native honeysuckles. And there's just so many great things happening there. Now you look at the food plots.
Well, I was just going to say that what you said, an important part of that was green.
Yeah.
It's green. And not everything green is forage, but maybe it's cover, but it's at least green, which is going to is a transition into what we're going into now, because it's been dry.
It's been very dry, and we're not even the driest in the country. There's parts that are just. No. One of our clients in Oklahoma, he's been keeping me updated on his food plots, and thankfully he's had a few rains where he planted some species that were very drought tolerant
and heat tolerant.
And so anyway, he's doing okay, but it's much worse than what we have it, and we got it pretty bad. And you look at those food plots, and what's green is stressed. And in a lot of instances, especially what's green is still stressed, especially because it's soybeans. It's some of these other species that just aren't cut out to be a monoculture. And the clover's gone dormant. And but then you look over and you see some of the native vegetation up on the edge or where we harvested, and it's just green, and you're like, how do I get more of that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, how do I get more? But I need more of that. In essence, most people are relying too much on a food plot situation to carry a deer herd or population, whatever it may be, through these stressful times. Whereas native vegetation is used to this, built for this, adapted to this, ready for this type of condition. And that's why you're seeing such a big difference in what it can do in these times versus a planted food plot that you spent money on and had all the right, soil amendments, but you didn't get the rain. Like, it's out of your control. But what's getting through this time frame are the natives, the native species. They're adapted. And I don't know if there's another way to just pound that in, but Kip Adams showed a really, really good representation on Instagram. I think it was, did he share that today? Was that
today? I believe so.
But if you don't follow Kip, go ahead and follow him and look at a recent post of his. It was a fallow field right next to, adjoined a planted soybean field. And the difference between the two, he's extremely dry in northern PA as well. And you can tell that in the food plot that he planted the soybeans in. There's a lot of exposed soil. The beans are browsed. But when you compare that to the fallow field that was corn last year, and again, he didn't do anything. There's no money. He just left it alone, walked away, and the amount of cover and forage in that fallow field far outweighs what is in the planted, attempted to be managed food plot.
The soybeans were maybe 6 inches tall, maybe.
Right.
And
he had a good germination, he said, at the beginning of this.
You can see
spring.
clear rows in the soybeans, but they're 6 inches tall or less, getting just hammered and not really continuing to grow because of the dry conditions. But then you look at the fallow field, and it's, I don't know, varied. There's all kinds of height difference, and there's all kinds of green growth that's continuing to grow because
and weeds.
It thrives in this dry stuff. And I think, how many times I got to say it, but I love ragweed. And it's because the fact that when everything else is shutting down, it's just like pushing things out of the way going, it's my time to shine.
Yeah.
And it's providing high quality forage. And in a lot of times it's providing great cover. I mean, I walked through patches of giant ragweed in that timber harvest that were over my head.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
And browsed all around where the deer can reach. It's almost like one of those cedars, white cedars in northern Michigan during the winter that it's taller and thicker around at the top because that's where the deer can't reach it. And that's what this giant ragweed, it wasn't quite browsed that much, but it's definitely getting browsed. But there's plenty more of it. So I know that it's going to be all fine. And guess what? It didn't cost me a thing.
No, in that situation, money was actually made. It's for the landowner. But it is night and day the differences that you get out of these species that are adapted for these conditions. And that's why we always talk about looking at the Web Soil Survey. If you want your acres to be the most productive that they can be, then you have to understand what that area should be. Because that seed bank, if it hasn't been ruined or destroyed, then it will be the most productive because that is what your land, your acres should be.
If you are attempting to put something that's not adapted to that soil on your land, it's going to take money to get it to thrive. It's going to take money to get it to even continue in the future. And that's why, and if you're trying to replicate what's native there, and I think of sometimes I've seen Facebook posts on habitat managers where guys are planting eastern red cedars out on the prairies of Kansas or prairies of Oklahoma to provide cover, but then they want to improve that in the same sentence. I'm trying to improve my prairie. Well, your prairie is most likely improved the best way with two types of native disturbance, either grazing or fire. So how do you burn a prairie without burning up an eastern red cedar? It's
counterintuitive.
dang near impossible to do it. And so there's other species that are a little more adapted to fire that you can plant to provide the cover that they were looking for, but still continue to even provide forage, woody browse through the winter. And so look at the native landscape. If we're really looking at this and going, how can I save money? Overall, it comes down to, I don't know, I won't even throw it out there. Well, maybe I will. 70% of the people are like, how can I get big deer with the least amount of money?
A chainsaw.
Yeah, that's one way. That's a start. Or fire if you're in the grasslands. And so chainsaw or fire.
Not pulling the trigger.
Yeah,
all that combined. Wow.
But no, what I was going to say to that picture, that what'd the soil look like in that bean field that was exposed? Like the color of this table, right?
Yeah, just dry, powdered, gray.
Our fields are looking like that too because they're heavy stress right now. They're getting eaten.
There's
we haven't
no
had any
moisture.
Water. Yeah, there's no moisture. But the fields that we we hadn't planted the beans and we kind of just let go that have maybe been in clover or something.
Yeah,
they're green.
You will
the
find
fields are green.
Moisture within the soil up higher in the profile. You won't have to dig nearly as deep in those fields versus the ones that you planted.
Right.
Because they're getting baked and rocked right now.
And nature works of trying to cover the soil and improve the soil to where it can continue in the future. But that's why we always bring up the question of how long can your soil bake before it's going to take
Toast.
a lot of work to improve it. And sometimes the best thing to do would let it go fallow and let it fix itself rather than us try to play the man that can fix everything and continue planting monocultures.
That brings up basically another point that we want to make today and some observations that we've seen. And Zach, you talked about your dad had recently sprayed out some weeds in these plots. And now the soil is completely exposed in those if that herbicide works and takes. Mm-hmm. Whereas in a situation that we're in, we had soybeans, and then they got browsed pretty heavy right when we got started, right when they germinated. But we had additional vegetation growing within that area that had planted just the soybeans. And we looked at it, I was like, well, that could probably be Johnson grass or one of the millets at this time. It was just so young, you couldn't tell. Adam, what did you see today in that area?
So going back to when you talked about it being browsed heavy, the soybeans were really the only thing growing out there. There was stubble from last year's cover crop, but that was pretty much all that was really growing. So the deer were hammering those soybeans. But as we got a little bit warmer, we started seeing, in the soil specifically got a little bit warmer, we started seeing some other grasses start growing. It was the millets. And they started growing. Of course, got a little warmer, so they were growing. They caught up to the soybeans, and they started growing together. And now we have soybeans and this millet that's just now probably, I don't know, 2.5, 3 foot tall, possibly. The beans are right there, the same height as the millet. And they've been kind of working together, competing with each other, trying to get to the sunlight and building roots and just getting up there. But this whole time, the soybeans have been protected because of the millet. And better yet, the soil has been protected because it's not getting scalded by the sun.
Right.
And so now today you're looking at a sea of what looks like millet, but the soybeans are just right there below it. And that, Matt, we've talked about all summer going, what would you rather have? Would you rather have the weeds and the soil protected, or would you rather have the monoculture of soybeans completely left alone and sprayed to where they're the only thing out there? And a lot of times we see this and we are actually experiencing it ourselves on one of our permanent forest openings that we planted in the soybeans, the Stratton Game Changer soybeans, to where it's just pretty much 90% soybeans by themselves, none of these other weeds growing. And because of those millets, and it ended up being foxtail millet, which a lot of people fight.
A lot of people hate foxtail and is an enemy, a noxious weed in food plots.
Yeah, and it even really is for us, but we're looking at it from...
People are turning over in their grave thinking we did not spray foxtail millet or Johnson grass early on.
Yeah, and here's the thing. The seed's not viable yet.
No.
So we're letting it continue to grow.
Mature.
And we're letting it grow and help protect those soybeans, protect that soil. And now this is the trick, though, in this game. At what point can we spray out the Johnson grass and the foxtail millet and allow our soybeans to then be exposed and the other grasses that have been killed start to break down to where we're kind of floating that line of going, okay, once we expose those soybeans, they're much more vulnerable for heavy browse pressure. And then how long before the rains so we can get our fall food plots in to have something else growing below those soybeans to protect our soil throughout the fall.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that we talked about, I believe a couple podcasts ago, was what do you do during the summer months? And it was observe and watch what is happening. If we had only taken action instead of observed how the relationship between these soybeans and our food plot was growing alongside of this grass that we didn't know exactly what it was at the time, we would have sprayed it, and then we still would have had a foot at the highest tall browsed soybeans. But now we have 2 to 2.5 foot tall soybeans that still, if a deer wanted to get in there, could browse them. And I'm sure you did see browse in there.
Oh yeah, there's browse in there.
But they're not pounded. We did the video on Facebook. We compared the monoculture soybeans to the soybeans that were within the heritage blend and the differences in growth. It's not limiting the growth. It's actually exponentially helping it along through to get to a point where we know in these acres we still provide forage right now during the summer months, but we're having a better chance of getting to pod production for the fall time. That's
been the debate that we've been seeing on Facebook with these mixed species of food plots of, well, you're going to lower your pod production. Yeah, well, maybe my pod production is going to go down, but guess what?
I got pods.
I'm going to have pods, but I'm going to have something else growing in there too. I'm not looking at it. I mean, if you were to summarize Land and Legacy, I think in one word, it'd be diversity.
Oh, yeah.
As far as our management strategy. And adding this diversity, now we have the soil protected for future higher production from our food plots, but we also are protecting our soybeans. Now we're going to have great pod production because once we spray this out, they're getting ready to start blooming right now, so they're going to have everything they need to go full-on pod production. So that's one thing we will continue updating you guys throughout the fall. But I got to say, we've been doing some tests with those game changer beans a lot more this year and comparing them and just trying to see how they stand up to heavy browse pressure.
And comparing to other beans out there, other forage-type beans out there.
Yes, and comparing them to conventional soybeans, comparing them to other forage Roundup Ready or glyphosate-tolerant soybeans, and the Strattons are definitely stacking up. And
they're holding their weight very well.
Yes, there really has been no difference. They've won all the awards as far as providing great forage. They beat out conventional beans because those can't take browse pressure. They're holding their own with the other forage soybeans, but these soybeans are fantastic, browse tolerant, and they're also great price.
Oh, yeah.
So check out GoStrattonSeed.com if you want to use some forage soybeans for, well, $40 a bag usually, give or take on your shipping, but that's about what the price is. So it's going to be hard to beat that when you're looking for forage soybeans.
Yeah, and one of the other things that we kind of made that comparison to of this millet, this foxtail millet that was growing within the beans, was an electric fence. That's a common thing that a lot of land managers do is that, hey, I'm going to protect my beans so they don't get foraged upon during the summer months, and then I'm going to open that gate and I'm going to let the deer in when hunting season comes. Well, this is a natural way of doing that and allowing, not as much browse pressure, but still allow browsing to occur.
They're not going to starve.
Oh, no.
They can go in there if they need to. I think it's a lot like since we manage the native habitat so well, it's a lot like cows that are trained to eat everything, to where they can't get selected because they got to focus on what's right in front of them. They're going to eat it.
Every
deer
step
the same
they're
way.
taking, they're eating.
They're eating the native vegetation right now because they're looking the majority of the population is looking at that field going, nah, there's not great forage or whatever, that I can find something better. I don't want to stick my face in all that grass to eat
or
those
I'm already
soybeans.
hungry from the time I stood up in my bed in this timbered the place that's been timbered to I walked out. I was eating the whole time.
Yeah.
Like there's so much out there.
They don't have to go to the food plot for their food because their
No.
food's standing all around them.
Yeah.
Is that millet something that the deer would browse on too?
No.
it's not.
No,
So you're
it's
just
not.
saying it's used kind of more as like
Right now it's protection,
sunshade,
sunshade, and helping those soybeans. Utilization cage
Yeah.
Yep.
or fence.
I got
Yeah.
I think going to that fence, Matt, it's a tool that I've seen more and more, and it's kind of one of those things where
Because we're not managing our antlerless deer population.
here,
Sorry, I had to say that.
yeah,
Had
if
to
you're
throw
not
it in
shooting,
there.
if you have to use a fence, well, you probably have too many deer.
Just saying.
And then also the one that gets me is when you protect the whole food plot with the fence, to where you did all this work to provide forage. And another thing is planting a forage bean. That's one. If you're planting a forage bean and then protecting it with a fence, it kind of
Why
goes
don't you
like
just
what
plant
a pod
beans?
production.
Yeah.
You would be better off with a pod production bean. But then you look at it and say, okay, if you're planting your one food plot or two food plots and fencing them off, you call yourself a deer hunter. That's not a deer manager. You're planting something and then forcing them to go somewhere and eat, and you're focusing all your time and money on the food plot for the beans to be fenced off. That's a deer hunter strategy, not a deer manager strategy.
Correct.
I had to put that out there as well, because that's one thing that just hurts me, is to see a food plot look terrible outside the fence and then inside the fence looks great, and the deer are trying to limp through summer just so then you have a great place to hunt them in the fall.
Seems counterintuitive. Like you're
It
planting
is.
it for the deer to eat, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's the thing. If that's the case, if that's the scenario that you find yourself in, then there's not enough outside forage beyond the food plots that is of high quality.
And I'm not condoning fences.
No, no.
And in
It's
fact,
a
today I
strategy.
talked to my brother when we were looking at these food plots. I said, this would be a good food plot for a fence. Half the food plot or 3/4 of the food plot is left alone, and then just a little section is fenced off, because they have plenty of food with the beans, but we are allowing them to have pod production.
You're
Gotcha.
you're not saying, hey, listen, I've got this stuff for you, but you can't have it now. It's, I've got all you could want, but I'm just saving this for you later on.
Right in front of the stand too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an incredible hunting strategy for sure.
Yeah.
But just like that native vegetation, you open that gate, or you take down the fence, and you give them access to it. And we talked about, what's that magical window in which you spray out this foxtail millet that falls down, shades out the ground, and then the beans are exposed. That's going to have a lot to do with rain right now in this situation.
Rain and seed production for the millet and the Johnson grass. We don't want it to go to a viable seed.
Correct.
We want to make sure it's terminated before that. And so Johnson grass is starting to pollinate, so we're going to have to spray soon before it makes a productive seed. And we're going to spray it out, knock it back. Of course, it has other ways with its rhizomes to continue growing and spreading, but knocking it back to where it's not going to take over the complete field. And that's why sometimes, when we get this question a lot, when do we know when to plant a monoculture soybeans versus something like heritage blend, which is a lot of diversity? Well, you got to get that noxious weed under control. And right now, the Johnson grass is under control. It's there, but it's not spreading, taking over the entire field. So,
and this millet is under control.
yeah,
We've chose not to control it yet. And that's the thing. We've opted to not spray weeds in the food plot and have only gained from it. We haven't lost anything because there are not viable seeds out there. And there won't be, because we do plan on spraying a herbicide and killing it before that happens.
yes,
We've only gained and gotten more forage out of having weeds in the food plots versus spraying it earlier.
Yes, and not just the foxtail millet, but not just the Johnson grass, but in other food plots it's crabgrass.
Yeah.
And crabgrass is, of course, it's like a turfy, shorter grass, but there were spots of it today where it was as green as
this is its
soybeans.
Time to shine.
Yes.
It's that forward.
And
that grass.
It was 16 inches tall, thick as can be, protecting that soil. Still had moisture in it from the morning dew, and that was about midday.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's hot today.
I mean, you go out into a soybean field that's heavily browsed, 6 inches tall or 12 inches tall, or maybe they're 2 inches tall. You're not going to find any dew on that field even 2 hours after the sun come up. But you get this thicker stuff, more vegetation. The dews hold longer because you trap that dew. It doesn't evaporate as quickly. Same thing's happening with your soil.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. To me, I hope that the illustration and the discussion of allowing weeds and nature to benefit the supplementing of the food that you're offering. This is I don't know if anyone else is saying like, yeah, I'm just letting those weeds go. Like I'm letting them do it because it's going to help me. That mindset, we talk about timbering and harvesting and clear cuts being a tough mindset to get into and adopt. This is worse. Like, this is your baby. You've put time and effort into planting that food plot, and now you're just going to let other things grow in it? Absolutely, because it's only helped in this situation.
And it's still under control, even though it doesn't look like it. We can spray it. So we'll spray it this week because of the Johnson grass getting ready to go to seed. We'll spray it all, and then we'll probably return and have to spray again in mid-August as we get ready to plant our fall food plots. But that's all still up in the air. We're not sure what's going to happen. If we spray this and it all falls down and it provides a weed mat, we may not have to spray again. But we're definitely on the right track as far as saving some.
Are you worried about it?
No.
I'm not either.
I got other things to worry about. Yeah, for sure. And I think, you look at the ragweed too. That goes into the I look at that edge, and that's why I'm so excited about the Pure Air Natives blends that we're putting together, because you look at the edge where the soybeans aren't doing great regardless, because you have so many trees that are sucking up nutrients and they're in the shade, but they're just not doing well. And you can plant some of these mixes that we're coming up with Pure Air to where they're perennial, so they have a lot bigger root system. They're allowed to fight with those trees, and we're also going to do edge feathering. But how many times we go to the edge of our food plot and see ragweed, common ragweed, giant ragweed?
When don't we?
It happens all the time, and it's like that 5 yards next to the trees, we don't really even do much with it. We may drill through it, but it's not like we go with the boom spray and it's like we have to spray right up next to the trees.
No.
Because so much grows along that edge that's so beneficial.
Like, come on, guys, let's grow.
Yeah, and I see giant ragweed and common ragweed today growing everywhere, and I smile a little bit because I'm like, man, it's kind of one of those like, you're my boy, Blue.
Yeah.
You're my boy, ragweed. And the problem is I see so many people trying to spray it out and get rid of it, and it's just it hurts. It breaks my heart.
Yeah.
Because it's so beneficial, great forage, everything. So anyway, wow, we're already over an hour, and we pretty well talked about food plots and timber harvest. Hopefully that gave you guys an update. Well, that was a given. So we talked about our timber harvest and the amount of change that happened. We will be sharing pictures and videos from that very soon. So check us out on Facebook, Land and Legacy. Check us out on Instagram, same thing. Check us out on YouTube. Subscribe so you can see more videos as we continue posting more. And our food plots. Start thinking about that, of how you can be more productive as far as not just promoting monocultures, but letting some weeds grow or planting more varieties. Guys, got anything?
I was just going to say,
we gotta do a would you rather.
Yeah, make sure so when that plant ID comes into usefulness, knowing what it is that's growing.
Plant ragweed.
There you go. The next food plot blend from Stratton is going to be common and giant ragweed.
That's it.
Coming to you $5, a 50-pound bag.
That's it. Broadcast heavy.
No fertilizer required.
Just hot sun.
That's right. The hotter, the better. I I tell you, you call me crazy, but a lot of times you can get that same thing with those fallow fields. A lot of times you'll see, I mean, parts of that, even where we sprayed out the fescue, it was chest high common ragweed for 100 yards. And you're just
just flat.
Oh my gosh, remind me how much I love this, but not to come back in September when it's pollinating.
Oh man, yeah.
I'll be sneezing like crazy, but it is a wonderful thing. But would you rather? You guys ready? You got anything in mind?
I was waiting for you, right?
I think I've asked this question before, maybe a variety, but I'll just say, would you rather, because this might be, we'll talk about it, the podcast, the hunting podcast we'll do a little later, but would you rather buy and hunt out of a ladder stand or a climbing stand?
Climbing.
You'd rather have a climber?
A little bit more versatile. Yeah, and I feel like a ladder stand, you put those things up, it seems like they're just like permanent. Like you don't ever want to take the things down. They're so hard to
Not
take.
me at 15.
Oh, yeah.
Give me
I
a
can't tell you how many daggum ladder stands I trucked through the woods because that was my stand and it was going where I wanted it to go.
Well, it wasn't that. It was, that's my stand. That's the only one I got.
I'm either building or I'm taking this over to the next
I'm
ridge.
sitting on the ground. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Because while it's still dark, I don't want to be down there.
Yeah. I would rather to hunt specifically. I'd rather just hunt out of a climber too.
I should have said, would you rather have a ladder stand or a hand-built box blind? Like, both are permanent. I'm just trying to think because my brother and I were talking today about if you only had one choice, what would you go with? And so I knew that I've asked the would you rather climber or stacking sticks, and so I went with the.
Would you guys rather build a native blind with like cedars and limbs and piling up and around you, kind of like in a blow down tree on the field edge, where you've edged feathered and it's perfect, or would you rather be in a well placed pop up blind? Yeah.
I'd rather be in a redneck.
No, that was that. I said pop-up blind.
Oh, okay.
I think I'd rather be in a pop-up blind. I feel like there's just more. You're concealed a little bit better. Mm-hmm. I've actually built ground blinds before.
You need to come to see one of the ones I built.
It's like the igloos.
Cuts down all the forest.
I certainly cut down all the cedars.
Yeah. I'm getting in that mess.
I would say probably by myself, no cameras, nothing. I'm going to just cut down the natives and sit in it.
Oh,
yeah, for sure. But we don't have that luxury a lot, so we'll go with the pop up.
I got a would you rather.
All right, let's hear it.
All right, would you rather kill on a spot and stalk prairie hunt, kill a 160-inch mule deer with a bow?
Yes.
Or kill a 160-inch whitetail on your farm that you guys have worked so hard on.
Oh, come on now.
I'm going the whitetail on my farm. I'd take that over.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I'd take that over a 200 muley.
All right. I'm just okay.
Yeah. To me, it doesn't matter the size. I love the reward. That goes with that saying of
right. Okay. What kind of animal would it take to not let you like kill that 160? Like a big giant moose, like some once in a lifetime animal.
Maybe a big giant moose in Alaska.
I'd take
really?
One time
absolute moss like 390-inch bull elk.
Like Colorado, a once in a lifetime
archery
animal.
It'd take a once in a lifetime. And it would happen once. Yeah. Like I wouldn't say if once that was done, and then you asked me again, I'd say no. I'd rather shoot one at my farm.
I got you.
So
I should have went with a moose then, or like a 200-inch muley and a 160.
Yeah.
That game of figuring it all out and just watching it unfold the way you've thought it would or should, or you cannot beat that.
It is. That's hard to beat.
Cannot do it.
It is.
It's very hard to beat. All right, guys, we will. Hopefully you enjoyed this week's podcast. Be sure to check us out on Facebook and leave a review, please, either on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you can leave reviews. I don't even know if you can leave them on Stitcher, but leave us a review on Facebook, please. And be sure to check out the apparel coming very soon.
Very soon.
Watch them on YouTube.
There you go. YouTube.
Next week, we're in New Orleans.
That's right.
We don't know what kind of things we're going to get
New
ourselves
Orleans.
into. It'll be
When
a
you
fun
say
time.
New Orleans, when you say you're going down there, it's got to be New Orleans.
Nolans.
Oh gosh.
All right, we'll catch you guys next time.
See ya.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Land and Legacy's Hunting and Habitat Management Podcast. If you like what you hear, check us out at landandlegacy.tv. You can submit a viewer question right there, and we're answering on the podcast, or find us on Facebook and Instagram.
Feels pretty good knowing that from the beginning of time, God has called us to be a caretaker, gamekeeper, a manager of the land. So with that being said, don't you think we should do it all for the love of the land and the glory to God?